The country is currently enduring the COVID-19 fourth wave. At the same time, the latest figures are showing Omicron variant is more infectious to younger people. Meanwhile, the Department of Basic Education says that schools plan to reopen on schedule in January 2021. Should this be assessed amid rising coronavirus infections? For this conversation, I'm joined by Teacher Union Sadtu Secretary General Mugwena Maluleke, alongside National Alliance of Independent School Associations and Baker. Thank you both so much for your time. Mr. Maluleke, let me just start with you. We've just spoken to the MEC for Education in the province, Mr. Panyaza Lesufi, who said that it would be too drastic for schools to shut down before the 15th of December. Given what we are seeing with Omicron variant and how it's spreading, especially amongst the unvaccinated and the younger population, what is your assessment? Should schools close earlier?
Thank you, Heidi, and good afternoon to your viewers at home. The question around the issue of closure is very important, because if we adopt an approach that says that we need to de-accelerate the spread and the transmission of the virus, you therefore have got to apply an adjusted shutdown or lockdown, and that would then mean that reducing the mobility, because we're bringing a lot of volume, especially that it is affecting the young people. So what should be happening is, because they're done with their examination, it is important that a decision be taken by the Department of Basic Education, and in particular the Gauteng Department, to then say, look, let the students really be at home, be observed, and so that they can be able to protect their parents and their grandparents, especially because we still have got people who are unvaccinated and therefore may likely be severely affected. So we should be advocating for that kind of an approach where you are saying it's Gauteng only that is affected, and therefore that there's a possibility, and therefore you need to apply that particular methodology of being adjusting and really close their schools early, especially for the learners.
Sure. Let's go to Anne Baker from the National Alliance of Independent Schools Association. What is your assessment, Anne, looking at what is happening in Gauteng alone? Over 80% of infections, positive infections of COVID-19, most likely Omicron, come from this province. Do you think schools should close earlier? Do you think it's a risk that schools remain open until the 15th of December?
Good afternoon to you and your listeners. In fact, the independent school sector has largely closed its schools because, as Mr. Maluleke says, exams are finished. Teachers continue to do their work of marking and getting reports ready. A lot of schools serve communities, and once there's quite a high percentage of community spread, which is the case in Gauteng, then schools decide to close early rather than just stay open for the last few days. So the majority of schools in Gauteng have closed. This does not apply to the other provinces yet, as I could ascertain. In fact, in KZN, schools seem to be staying open. But the majority of independent schools in Gauteng, in fact, closed from Monday last week or later the week, Thursday, Friday. So as we stand now, that is the decision the schools have taken to prevent unnecessary spread at this time.
Sure. Mr. Maluleke, let's bring you in with regards to mandatory vaccinations. I know this conversation is nowhere near completed. We know there's a task team that's been established by the President. But what the NICD has identified is the fact that those under the age of 19 are being infected with Omicron. And when they did an assessment, they found that their parents, either the mother or the father, or probably both, were not fully vaccinated. How important do you think is it for the message of vaccination to be driven, especially amongst those 12 to 17 and parents that have not yet been vaccinated?
Heidi, we must do everything we can in motivating and encouraging everyone to get vaccinated. We know that the vaccine is working. We know that it saves lives, and therefore our campaign for vaccination goes on, and therefore we support the President's task team to go and investigate and be able to report to the President as a matter of urgency, because we cannot be left out by the world. I mean, just on Thursday, Germany has locked down those who are unvaccinated, actually restricting them from accessing very important services in order for them to really take a decision to vaccinate. Therefore, the issue of mandatory vaccination has been delayed, and I have said it last year that is an inevitable that we are going to reach this particular stage where we'll talk about mandatory vaccination, and it was important that we should have engaged into a crisis talk as a country to then say, are we choosing life or are we choosing more rights and more rights when people are dying, when the economy is collapsing, and when the livelihoods are being affected? And therefore, those who do not qualify to be vaccinated, clearly their doctors will say so, and therefore they will take that decision on the basis of an informed medical and scientific evidence and so forth. So we must really support the president to save the lives, to save the livelihoods, and reopen our economy so that we're able to save this generation of our learners, which we are facing a generational catastrophe if we don't talk about this particular thing. Yes, my organization has not reached a definite decision about mandatory or not mandatory. However, we are saying the task team, if it comes and say mandatory, will then be able to follow their scientific analysis and their scientific reasoning around the issue of mandatory vaccination.
And what is your stance on mandatory vaccinations? We know that those aged 12 to 17 are eligible to be vaccinated, and they in fact don't need consent from their parents. Of course, they do need some kind of guardianship, if possible, the Department of Health urges. But what do you think about the fact that a lot of them don't come for the vaccine because maybe they live in a house where people don't accept the COVID-19 vaccination? Do you think it should become mandatory, given what we are seeing with the younger population being infected and a lot of them being unvaccinated?
Well, I think it's such a sort of sensitive question. But if we look at the common good, and the common good is the good of all of us, then we should all be willing to be vaccinated for others. I think that is the big problem, that it's all about my own personal rights and not taking the rights of others into account. So what some of our schools have done is they have sought parental permission, but have then bussed children to vaccination sites, sometimes in a rolling manner, so that there's some schools that have got all their children vaccinated like that. And while it wasn't mandatory, it was persuaded. And the young people didn't seem to be resistant at all. Obviously, some will come from those homes you speak about. But I think we have to stop talking about individuals' rights and start talking about the common good. Because after all, education is for the common good. And as Mr. Maluleke has said, the impact on education is far greater than the average person knows at the moment, with the learning losses and what they even call learning poverty coming about. So I do think that mandatory vaccinations will help, especially the high school children, not to miss school, not to infect older family members. It doesn't obviously stop them getting COVID, but it protects them largely. So I believe that while it's a very contentious issue, when people resist getting vaccinated, how do we make the community safe? How do we improve safety for the community?
Mr. Maluleke, let's just ask you one final question. We do know that schools are expected to close on the 15th of December, resume probably around the 12th of January. It's a lot shorter break. Gauteng specifically is expected to peak in the next 2 weeks or so. We don't know what the 12th of January will look like. How do we strike a balance to make sure that those at school are protected, but also don't miss out on teaching and learning because of what we saw previously with hard lockdowns? How do we make sure that everybody is protected in this situation? Sorry, I think you're on mute, Mr. Maluleke. If you could just unmute yourself.
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry.
No
yes,
problem.
Because I'm in a crowded area. Yeah, not that I'm crowded. So what should happen basically, and thanks to Anne, what we need to be doing now is to making sure that we de-accelerate the transmission by making sure that the schools close, and then we allow the teachers to mark at home, because the learners should be at home by now, and therefore then make sure that we embark on tracing and tracking, because that is very important for the schools and it's very important for the communities to be able to have an impeccable tracing and tracking system to ensure that we ready ourselves for the 12th of Jan in 2022. If we don't do that, we might find ourselves in a prolonged, fourth wave that will, at the end of the day, affect the reopening of the schools like it happened in 2021, because you are using adjusted risk approach to deal with this particular issue. For me, it's very important that we embark now on tracking and making sure that we observe and make sure that the mobility of the learners is reduced or is brought to a hold altogether. Congratulations to the independent school. I have seen them. They've issued letters that the learners must be at home. I think that is a sensible decision to be taken. But also, I want to really congratulate them for really, advocating for vaccination for the young students and so forth. And they've done very well. And I think it's important for the public schooling system to also do the same. So if we reduce mobility now, we will be able to ensure that the schools can reopen on the 12th of Jan. But if we don't, we are going to be sitting on the 1st of Jan and the 2nd in a crisis meeting where we'll have to agree on whether to delay by a week or 2 weeks like we did in 2021. It has got serious implication, but I believe leadership is required and we are there for that particular purpose.
Sure, and very quickly, what is your stance? Do you think schools will be safe enough to open on the 12th of January, given what we're seeing with this variant?
Yes, I think so. I think we have to make sure that we do not lose any more learning. And I know that people say, the independent sector is privileged because it goes online. That's only true of some of the wealthier independent schools. And the other research is showing that online learning isn't the greatest thing for children. Socially, we now have a generation who are isolated, do not have the relationships they should. So we have to do everything we can to have face-to-face teaching. Because both what they call hybrid learning, where some stay at home and teachers teach, and online is very stressful for the learners and for the teachers. So we've got to pray that we do everything right now to make this wave less. And that's the responsibility of the community. It's not just the schools. The schools are just part of the community, and they do their very best with keeping to the protocols for keeping children safe. So I hope, with fervent hope, that the schools open normally and these children can begin the year the way they ought to.
Sure, great. Thank you so much to Anne Baker from the National Alliance of Independent Schools Association and Sadtu's General Secretary, Mugwena Maluleke. Thank you so much for your insights.